It's difficult to say with any level of certainty, but I think that for my money, I would put Davos Seaworth as the most beloved viewpoint character in all of A Song of Ice and Fire, and I think this is for a number of reasons. First and foremost, he is our main eyes on Stannis Baratheon, the one true king, who many, many people love, myself included. Additionally, Davos is very unique as far as viewpoints in Ice and Fire go, especially considering how early he was introduced to the series. He was introduced as a viewpoint and as a character in A Clash of Kings, and he is very unique from the other characters in that book who serve as our point of views, specifically because Davos is lowborn. He was born a commoner. He did not really have anything to his name. He was a simple smuggler, and he was raised to nobility by Stannis after breaking the siege of Storm's End. Or by breaking, I mean he smuggled in some onions and allowed the castle to not starve, which is very nice of him and just really endears him to the reader. He's also fairly relatable. I'd say he's our most hobbity of all of the viewpoint characters in Ice and Fire, and his journeys throughout the series are all very fun to read about. He gets into a lot of unlikely situations, and that will likely continue to happen in the future. Today, I'm going to look back at Davos's recent past in Ice and Fire and figure out what might happen to him in the Winds of Winter. We have to go back a little further than the most recent book to figure out what's going on with Davos to have a bit wider context, as in A Storm of Swords, we see Stannis Baratheon arrive at the Wall and smash the wildling host, saving Jon Snow from near certain death, and then taking up brief residence at the Wall. However, as all these interactions start happening between these two very different branches of the story, you begin to notice that somebody's missing. We're not getting any viewpoint perspective chapters from Stannis' camp during this time, and you eventually notice that Davos Seaworth is not present. He is not with the one true king at the Wall, and that is quite weird. Nor was he left anywhere else at the Wall, which several other people were, such as Queen Selyse. Davos was sent southward, slightly, not very southward as it is still in the north, but he was sent to White Harbor to win the Manderleys to Stannis' cause, in the hopes that they will want justice against the Freys, the Boltons, and the Lannisters for what happened at the Red Wedding. We don't hear any updates on the progress of this mission in the Storm of Swords or Feast for Crows. Well, one brief and a Feast for Crows. We'll get to that in a second. But Davos's chapters are mostly contained to the front half of Storm of Swords, where he reunites with Stannis after the Blackwater, frees Edric Storm, who was a bastard of Robert Baratheon, who's going to be sacrificed, and then convinces the one true king to go north and fight the true enemy. Important question. Who do you want to see next in this series? I have a playlist, which you can find on my channel, of all of the previous entries. I've done, I think, 7 at this point, so your favorite character might be done already, so check that out. And while you're there, be sure to leave a like and subscribe, and just let me know what other characters you want to see me cover in the comments below. Thank you. I'm bad at plugging. As mentioned, there are a couple references to Davos Seaworth in A Feast for Crows, and I do not envy the readers who read this book and then had a 5-year wait for A Dance with Dragons, because for that entire 5-year wait, they thought righteously that Davos was dead. Because Cersei hears about Davos's mission in a small council meeting where Wyman Manderly writes her a letter and says, "Hey, we have this envoy from Stannis here. What do you want me to do with him?" Cersei says, "Kill him." So Wyman then mounts his head and hand with shortened fingers on the walls of White Harbor to show the goodwill of the crown and that they are still in lockstep with the Lannister regime. This was honestly very shocking on my first read of Feast, as I didn't think that Davos was going to die that early in the story, but man, I guess these books really are different from the show. It is kind of funny to see how that ends up panning out in retrospect, as Davos as a character has had a ton of fake out deaths. He had one after the Blackwater, and now he has one again in Feast. Davos's story in A Dance with Dragons is fairly brief and fairly contained to the front half of the book. There aren't any Davos chapters in the second half or even the latter 2/3 of the novel. The first two, in my opinion, don't kill me, don't shoot me, but I think that the first two Davos chapters in A Dance with Dragons are actually pretty weak. The first chapter sees him and the sisters wheeling and dealing with one of the lords there to negotiate passage to White Harbor. It's not a bad chapter, but it is just kind of a reintroduction to who Davos is, what he's doing, and just him negotiating with a fairly irrelevant lord. I do like the detail that he is the first viewpoint in this book, other than Tyrion, to hear of Tywin's death. I think that's pretty fun and shows that he's very much like in touch with the common people and able to just get information pretty easily. And then his second chapter is him arriving in White Harbor and just exploring the city a little bit, gathering some more information. Again, it's a nice little reconnaissance chapter with Davos playing the role of the common man and using that to relate to other people and get information out of them, but it's just not the greatest, and it's one of my least favorite chapters in the book. That said, his later chapters very much make up for it. Davos' third chapter in A Dance with Dragons is where the fake out from A Feast for Crows comes into full effect. Davos is held as a kind of hostage, kind of guest for almost 3 weeks, awaiting an audience with Lord Wyman Manderly. When that audience finally comes, it is much more hostile than both we, the audience, and Davos expected. Not only is it before Wyman's entire court and members of his family are openly berating him and calling Stannis' cause doomed and calling him a pretender, there are also 3 Freys in attendance. Wyman Manderly is fairly tied to Lord Walder's house at this point, as 2 of his sons were involved in the Red Wedding. One of Wyman's sons was killed, and his bones were returned by the 3 Freys who are now at court, and the other is held hostage in the aftermath of this event. Because of all these factors, Wyman seems to be in complete lockstep with the Lannister regime. He is berating Davos, he is dismissing Stannis' cause, and he is holding Davos hostage with the hopes of executing him very soon on orders from the Queen. That's where I expected Davos' story to end in A Dance with Dragons on my first reread, as I really didn't know what was going to happen, and we'd already heard that he died in Feast, so of course he's dead. But there is one more Davos chapter in this book, and it's, I think, widely considered to be the fan-favorite chapter from A Dance with Dragons. Davos is still being held hostage in a cell, he's still fairly comfortable, he's writing letters to his children, which is nice, given that he did lose so many sons on the Blackwater. It was not just the one like it was in the show. He's then led into a private audience with Wyman Manderly and a couple of his closer friends and lords. Wyman Manderly reveals that the Mummer's farce is almost done, that the North remembers, and that he is truly and completely for House Stark. And if Stannis is able to help him with one particular mission, he will aid the one true king in his quest against the Boltons. That one little mission is fairly treacherous. You see, Wyman has come into possession of a boy named Wex, who was Theon Greyjoy's squire. Theon obviously did not burn Winterfell, but everyone thinks he did. And along with burning Winterfell, everyone thinks that Theon killed Bran and Rickon Stark. Wex knows that he did not. Wex saw Bran and Rickon escaping with Asha and Hodor, and they saw them all just depart. He followed Asha and Rickon northward, and seeing them eventually fall into the hands of the Glovers, and then move further north still onto an island known as Skagos. It is up to Davos to retrieve Rickon and potentially Asha from this island and win Wyman's support for Stannis. I wasn't going to include this initially, but I feel ethically, spiritually, morally, and legally obligated to share with you, if you haven't heard or haven't heard in a while, one of my favorite pieces of writing in all of Ice and Fire. To quote from Davos for A Dance with Dragons: "When treating with liars, even an honest man must lie. I did not dare defy King's Landing so long as my last living son remained a captive. Lord Tywin Lannister wrote me himself to say that he had Willis. If I would have him freed unharmed, he told me, I must repent my treason, yield my city, and declare my loyalty to the boy king on the Iron Throne, and bend my knee to Roose Bolton, his Warden of the North. Should I refuse, Willis would die a traitor's death. White Harbor would be stormed and sacked, and my people would suffer the same fate as the reigns of Castamere. I am fat, and many people think that makes me weak and foolish. Mayhaps Tywin Lannister was one such. I sent him back a raven to say that I would bend my knee and open my gates after my son was returned, not before. There the matter stood when Tywin died. Afterward, the Freys turned up with Wendell's bones, to make a peace and seal it with a marriage pact, they claimed. But I was not about to give them what they wanted until I had Willis safe and whole, and they were not about to give me Willis until I proved my loyalty. Your arrival gave me the means to do that. That was the reason for the discourtesy I showed you at the Merman's Court, and for the head and hands rotting above the seal gate. You took a great risk, my lord, Davos said, if the Freys had seen through your deception. I took no risk at all. If any of the Freys had taken it upon themselves to climb my gate for a close look at the man with the onion in his mouth, I would have blamed my gaolers for the error and produced you to appease them. Davos felt a shiver up his spine. I see. I hope so. You have sons of your own, you said. 3, thought Davos, though I fathered 7. Soon I must return to the feast to toast my friends of Frey, Manderly continued. They watch me, sir. Day and night their eyes are on me, noses sniffing for some whiff of treachery. You saw them, the arrogant Sir Jared and his nephew Rhaegar, that smirking worm who wears a dragon's name. Behind them both stands Simon, clinking coins. That one is bought and paid for several of my servants and 2 of my knights. One of my wife's handmaids found her way into the bed of my own fool. If Stannis wonders why my letters say so little, it is because I dare not even trust my maester. Theomore is all head and no heart. You heard him in my hall. Maesters are supposed to put aside old loyalties when they don their chains, but I cannot forget that Theomore was born a Lannister of Lannisport, and claims some distant kinship to the Lannisters of Casterly Rock. Foes and false friends are all around me, Lord Davos. They infest my city like roaches, and at night I feel them crawling over me. The fat man's fingers coiled into a fist, and all his chins trembled. My son Wendell came to the twins a guest. He ate Lord Walder's bread and salt, and hung his sword upon the wall to feast with friends. And they murdered him. Murdered, I say, and made the phrase choke upon their fables. I drink with Jared, jape with Simon, promise Rhaegar the hand of my own beloved granddaughter, but never think that means I have forgotten. The North remembers, Ser Davos. The North remembers, and the mummer's farce is almost done. My son is home. Skagos is a fairly isolated island with a fairly fearsome culture. They're known to be cannibals and keep the old gods and be this very first men centric area. They're also said to be unicorns on this island. I have an entire video on Skagos and what it could mean for the future of the Winds of Winter. I encourage you to watch that one either after you're done with this one or in the middle of it, but whatever, either way, Davos is heading there as of the end of his story in A Dance with Dragons, but it is worth noting that his story in A Dance with Dragons ends super duper early. I think he might be the first viewpoint character to be completely done with chapters. Bran might have him beat there, but it's close. The two of them end very early on, and that leads me to think that a lot of time will pass between their last chapter in A Dance with Dragons and their first chapter in The Winds of Winter. And in Davos' case, there is concrete reason as to why that might be the case. Just to signal it, we are now fully entering speculation station, but I think that by the time the Winds of Winter is starting, Davos might already be back from Skagos. I would not be surprised if we do not see Davos on Skagos outside of flashbacks. I could see flashbacks happening, though, primarily because the point at which the Manderleys are going to need to either aid or hurt Stannis is already here in the main story. We see in Theon's first sample chapter of the Winds of Winter that we are on the exact precipice of the Battle of Ice. The Battle of Ice is going to involve Stannis fighting against both the Freys and the Manderleys, and given that fact, it is essentially time for Wyman Manderley and his men to make a choice whether or not they're going to back Stannis. This, combined with the timeline of the book and Davos leaving to get Rickon quite a while ago, makes me think that Davos might have already returned and might have already brought this boy back into the fold and got the loyalty of the Manderleys for Stannis. It's also worth noting that at a point in The Dance with Dragons, Wyman Manderley gets a lot more brazen in defying the Boltons and the Freys within Winterfell. It's in Theon's last few chapters where we have him saying things like he was glad that one of the Frey boys got murdered because he would have grown up to be a Frey, and baking the Freys into pies. Someone that is being this kind of open and obvious about the fact that he's not working with these people anymore and he's actively being hostile to them makes me think that he has a reason to do that. He has his Stark back to support. With that said, I'm unsure on Rickon's role in the story so far. I didn't want to do a Winter is Coming for Rickon. This is kind of the half step because I have done all of the Stark kids already and I wasn't sure where I should go next. I thought that Davos and talking a little bit about Rickon could be good. But I do think that he has somewhat of a role to play, but his direwolf does give me pause. His direwolf is named Shaggy Dog, and that is a kind of story that essentially has no real point to it, so people think that Rickon's story might also not have a point. I do think that Rickon is going to be important. I think that likely he'll end up ruling the North with someone else's regent, perhaps Sansa. I think that Davos could end up as somewhat of a protector for this young Stark boy, at least until he's cleanly in Manderley hands. But where does Davos go after dealing with Rickon and the Manderleys? It's quite an interesting question, and I could see one of two different directions for it. You see, since Davos was last involved directly with Stannis, we've added one new viewpoint who is also quite related to the Baratheon cause. Melisandre is now a viewpoint as of the end of A Dance with Dragons, and it is worth noting that her perspective could very much conflict with Davos and be competing for chapters. That is why I think that the two of these characters will not end up sticking together. I think that Davos and Melisandre are going to represent two kind of causes in the North. I think that one of them is going to stay with Stannis. I think the other is going to stay with Jon Snow. Personally, I think that Davos is going to reunite with the one true king. Perhaps upon bringing Rickon to Winterfell, he will encounter Stannis, who might have claimed the castle for the Boltons, as I've talked about last video. not for the Boltons, against the Boltons. Stannis isn't working with the Boltons unless Martin is planning a crazy twist. But I think that Melisandre does seem quite likely to stay with Jon Snow, as once he is resurrected, I think it will become very clear and inarguable to her that Jon Snow is Azor Ahai. Whether or not he actually is Azor Ahai is up to debate. I go back and forth on it, but I think that Melisandre, at the very least, will see that Stannis isn't Azor Ahai, and Jon Snow certainly might be. So I think that Melisandre is going to be a viewpoint on Jon, and I think that Davos is going to end up as a viewpoint on Stannis. George Martin likes to have viewpoints in certain locations, and I think Davos might surprise people in the role that he's going to fill. Martin always likes to have a viewpoint in King's Landing, and he likes to have a viewpoint either at the Wall or in the Far North, or both. I think that Davos is going to be our Wall viewpoint for the second half of the Winds of Winter, as I think that after Stannis takes Winterfell and sees it reclaimed by the Starks, potentially as a king in the north, Stannis might go north again to fight against the true enemy, the White Walkers, and we would need someone with him in order to give updates on what is going on at the Wall with the Watch and with the White Walkers. That was a tongue twister. I think that Davos is very likely to be our guy in that regard. That said, I could see him staying south, wanting to reunite with his family, but at that point, I don't know whether he would have chapters anymore. Just going back to his family might not really have much to do with the plot as a whole, but I think that sticking with Stannis and defending the Wall could be a good way to keep viewpoints there, as I think that Jon Snow is going to get more drawn into southern politics and being removed from the Watch, as I believe his vows likely ended with his supposed death. That said, I could also see an epilogue viewpoint being our source of seeing the Wall fall. I've seen many people's pitch that Stannis could be that epilogue viewpoint. I don't think that'll be the case, but I think that it could be someone else at the Wall. Ed, maybe. Ser Davos Seaworth is quite the interesting character. I would say that of all of the viewpoint characters in A Song of Ice and Fire, I think he is the most good out of all of them, the most solely good-hearted, lawful good viewpoint out of anybody, except maybe like the kids, but I mean, that's kind of an unfair comparison. And also, Bran has done cannibalism and Arya is killing people. Sansa is fine, though. But that said, I think that Davos's just objectively good morality and stance as kind of a stand-in for the common man will result in him surviving the series in its entirety. Davos is one of very few characters I am very confident is going to survive A Dream of Spring, to be reunited with his family, and eventually maybe serve the realm. I could see him acting as a hand of the king for whatever monarch ends up taking the throne, or maybe a master of ships, like happens in the bad HBO show. I hope it's better than what happened there, but I do think that Davos is very likely to survive the series, as I don't think Martin is going to want to kill off someone so good-hearted. Martin isn't as bloodthirsty as people think he is, and I think that Davos might show people that. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Please let me know who you want to see next in this series in the comments. Any and all support on the video does really help the channel, and it just makes me feel good. It's a nice favor that you do me because it's free and it's just good. I'll have many more videos coming in the near future. More winter is coming, more other videos. Dunkin' Egg is coming up, so I'm going to get geared up for that come the new year. But yeah, I really appreciate any feedback, and I hope to see you all in the very near future. Goodbye, everyone.